Well, that's the intro to our new series starting this week, and it's entitled The Counselor. Now, I don't know if you've ever been to counseling before. I have, and I think it's important to seek out people that have a little bit more wisdom in certain areas in order to help you find the direction that you need. I remember once when I was at counseling, my counselor, after talking about a particular subject for a little while, asked me 2 questions. And it's interesting how insightful it can be when someone asks you a question. And here they are. Who are you trying to impress? And what is it that you're trying to prove? Now, when I really dug deep into the answers to those 2 questions, I realized there was something going on within me. And it's what is really amazing is that it is oftentimes the questions that are asked that help us understand what our journey is supposed to be. A good question will help you find the right answer. In the Gospels, Jesus Christ himself asked over 100 questions. When people were trying to question him, he would oftentimes come back with another question. And so what we're going to be doing in this series is we're going to look at 4 questions that Jesus asked and try and find out what the answer is for us. Today is the first question, and it's this: why are you so afraid? Now, that is a compelling question, and it demands an answer because so many of us, we live in a state of fear. Now, on the outside, we may feel fine or look fine, but on the inside, we are oftentimes filled with turmoil. And so this is a very, very important question. So let me give you the context of the text that we're going to be looking at today. Jesus was teaching from a boat, and the crowds had all gathered in and all around. And finally, Jesus says, let's leave the crowd and go to the other side of the sea. And the boat, which was his pulpit, is now about to become his sermon illustration. From the Gospel of Luke, this is what it says. Well, that was a little bit of a burn, wasn't it? Imagine that. You're in the middle of the sea, and the storm comes up, and at the end of it, Jesus says, "Where's your faith?" I mean, now, I have to be honest with you. I can look at that thing all day long, and I have never been in a boat about to sink. So I can't even really relate to that. And so, so we could often think, well, hey, guys, Jesus was with you. What do you think is going to happen? Jesus was right there with you. I go back to something that happened to me a number of years ago on a Lockheed 1011. And I was flying from Toronto to Calgary, and it was the worst turbulence I have ever experienced. In fact, I have never experienced anything like it since. It was one of those white knuckle flights, where you hold on and your knuckles, and every time you bob and weave and go up and down. And truth is, I mean, they stopped service and everything else, and the flight attendants strapped in, and we were all strapped in there, and there were a number of people on the flight that were actually screaming because they were afraid the plane was going to go down. Now, it didn't help. On a Lockheed 1011, there's sort of like a false ceiling on top. Now, that was shaking all over the place, and at one point, a couple of the tiles fell out, and so people screamed over that too. And so, I mean, I just want you to understand, it was a rough flight. And it went through my head, well, maybe this is it. Maybe I'm going down. And I'm hanging on, as if hanging onto your seat in an airplane is going to help you. You know what I mean? I mean, trust me, your seat's going down too, okay? But somehow it makes you feel a little bit more secure by holding on because you don't go up as high, and that sort of stuff up and down. I mean, and I thought to myself, maybe this is it. And I wonder what would have happened if at the end of the flight and we landed in Calgary, Jesus was on the flight. And he got up and looked right at me and said, "Where's your faith?" Because that's really what it's all about. And I think every one of us have been in some type of situation where if Jesus was there and says, "Where's your faith?" We'd often be thinking and looking and saying, "Well, I thought we were going down." Well, so did the disciples. They thought they were going down as well. And Jesus asked this penetrating question, "Where is your faith?" I'd like, if you would, to turn to the Gospel of Mark, chapter 4 and verse 35. We have Matthew and then Mark. Mark chapter 4 and verse 35. You'll find that on page 710. Mark 4:35. That day when evening came, he said to his disciples, "Let us go over to the other side." Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Okay? Now, we're talking about fishermen here, and I'm sure you've heard this before. These guys were used to being on the water, but it was so bad that they were concerned for their lives that they were going to be overtaken by the water. Now, the Sea of Galilee is 680 feet below sea level, and there are mountains on either side. And what I understand is it is quite often that a sudden storm will come up on the Sea of Galilee, and it will take you by surprise. And so there they are. Now, I think it's the same for us, to be honest with you. We can be going along quite fine saying, life is good. I have it really good. And then all of a sudden, something will happen to us to just throw us completely off course, off base. Maybe you're a salesman and you've had the best sales month that you've ever had, but you've just heard that the company is considering layoffs. and you know you may be one of the ones being laid off. Now, that's not an unfair analogy today, because with all the layoffs that have happened, I am sure everybody's been going along quite well, and then when the bottom fell out of the oil market and all those thousands of layoffs came, now people are still wondering, am I going to be next? And am I throw your life in complete upheaval? Or maybe your marriage is going along the best it has ever been in years and years and years, and your spouse goes to the doctor and they come back with bad news. Maybe it's cancer, maybe it's something else. And your life is just all up in upheaval. It just comes out of nowhere, and the rug is pulled out from under you. Or maybe you're a parent of a teenager, and you know there have been difficulties in the past, but you finally thought that your teenager was getting back on track again, and then you hear the news from someone that they were actually off track once again. When those sorts of things happen, you don't start looking at, well, God has been good here, God has been good here, and God has been good here. Our mind is wired in such a way that we zero in on the problem. And it's hard for us not to consider what the problem is and then focus our thoughts and attentions upon that. And you know, I want to say, I think church people, I don't know whether to say the worst at it or the best at it. Because the truth is, we church people will often hide. We hide behind our mask of everything is great, everything is wonderful, and I just have life by the tail. When in fact, nothing could be further from the truth. You know, it is possible that maybe someone is thinking, you know, maybe I wish I had that house. That's a nice house. It's something I aspire to. It's something I would like to have. And yet there are others that might be in the place where you're saying that, and they're thinking, or their thoughts are going, you know, I'm 2 months behind my mortgage. I'm not even sure I'm going to be able to keep the house that I have right now. But nobody knows the turmoil that you're in, because we keep it all to ourselves. Or sometimes people look and say, you know, those people have such a great marriage. Everything is wonderful for them, and I wish that I had an idea or I had a marriage like them. But yet, if you could really see on the inside, you would see that their marriage is just hanging on by a thread. That on the outside, everything is good, everything is fine, and you would think that it is absolutely 100% for them. And I suspect that there are people in this congregation, this fellowship, right here, right now, who if we look at you, we would say, you've got life by the tail. But there is something that you're not letting us in on, because you just put on that smile. Now, so I want to ask you a question, and I want you to be as honest as you can. You know, it may be a big storm, it may be a small storm, it may be a storm that someone very close to you is going through, but I am wondering how many of us right now are actually going through some type of storm. Look at that. Almost everybody. And yet we came in today, and most of us would never know that you are going through a storm. You may feel very, very alone. You may even cry yourself to sleep. But today, when you came in here, you put on a smile. And that's what we see is going on. So many of us are in a storm. And so with Jesus' question right now, I want to look at two thoughts that we need to remember when we're in a storm. Look at Mark chapter 4, verse 37 and 38, if you would. Mark chapter 4, verse 37 and 38. Says, a furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat, so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him up and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" Now, there are a couple of things in there that really I find interesting. I don't know why it says it. Maybe somebody here can help me. But the truth is, There they are in the storm, everything going around, the waves swamping over the boat. Why did it mention, I can understand that mentioning Jesus was asleep. I get that. Why did it mention that Jesus was asleep on a cushion? They were all on hard benches. Yeah. No worries. He was comfortable in the situation, yeah. And I think that's really the base of it, that he was comfortable. Now, I don't know about you, but I haven't been in boats where waves have come over. Not to the point where I think I'm going to drown or anything, but that's uncomfortable. Okay, if you're dry and the waves come over and you get wet, that's uncomfortable. It's a change in temperature and everything else. But here is Jesus where the water is swamping the boat, and it makes mention that he's asleep in the storm on a cushion. He's not sweating it at all. Not one little bit. And I'm wondering what's that supposed to say about us? Well, I think the first thing that it says is this. If I'm with Jesus, that's not true. I think what it should say to us, being with Jesus is really all we need. Here's the interesting thing. There are many of us who think because we are with Jesus, we think there shouldn't even be a storm. That I became a Christian, I became a follower of Jesus, and therefore Jesus should make my life good. I want to tell you that that just doesn't happen. That's not true. That's not the way God works with us. You know, Jesus himself said this, in this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. Jesus never promised that when we come to him, we are going to have smooth sailing. In fact, he promises that when we come to him, we won't have smooth sailing. That we will have storms in our lives because we are fighting a battle that many people can't even save or see. It is a battle between light and darkness, a battle with the principalities of the powers of this world. And it is a real battle, even though you don't see it. You suffer from the effects of the battle. But it is indeed a real battle. To say that we won't have battles is a distortion of what Jesus has actually said. What Jesus did say is, when you're in a battle, he will be with us, and it will not sink us. Okay? It will not sink us. I read an article this week. It was rather interesting, talking about older people. And I'm amazed at why that sort of article is interesting to me these days. I think it's because I'm getting older. But what I found interesting was it said this, that older people who had something alive in their house lived longer. Okay? Now, the something alive, it could be even a guy. That wasn't even the punchline. It could have even been a guy who is deaf and doesn't even talk to you anymore. Okay? But having this deaf guy in the house that doesn't even speak anymore helps you live longer. Okay? It could be something as simple as a fern, where you water every now and again. It helps you live longer. It could be a gerbil. It could be a rabbit. It could be a dog. The evidence is not in as far as cats are concerned, but as far as dogs are concerned, the evidence is in. It could be a little lap dog. It could be, a great big dog. But here's the thing. If you are living with something that is alive, you will live longer. Here's the thing. Every single one of us, we have the opportunity, the privilege, the joy, the amazing gift to be living with someone who is alive in our house and on the inside of us. And that's Jesus Christ. You know, he died to pay the penalty for our sins, and he says, I will never leave you nor forsake you. I will be with you. And this in and of itself should bring us tremendous encouragement and blessing. Just because we're in the storm doesn't mean Jesus isn't with us. In fact, in reality, Jesus is closer to us as we are going through the storm. You know, I like to look at Scripture, and when I look at it, I like to personalize it, because I think that's what Jesus wants us to do. So for one of the ones I like is Psalm 46, verse 1, where it says, well, it doesn't say, this is my personalization of it. God is my refuge. He is my strength. He is my ever-present help in a time of trouble. When you're going through a storm and you look at 46 verse 1, Psalm 46 verse 1, you can picture, you can imagine that God being your refuge, whatever that means to you. It could be that you're in a cave and God is at the entrance of the cave with his arms outstretched, knowing that you are going to be safe inside the cave because you have sought refuge with him. He's your strength. It may be that you know that you're not strong enough to get through this, but you know that Jesus really is, and he will be with you. Another text is Hebrews 13:5. Never will my God leave me. Never will he forsake me. So he promises that the storm doesn't have to rock us, okay? It affects us, but it doesn't have to rock us. No matter what we are going through, we can have perseverance with Jesus alive in our hearts. Here's the thing. You are in the storm for his purpose. Did you catch in the text that we read? Whose idea was it to go to the other side of the lake? Jesus. Jesus. And so they were in the storm not because they were out of God's will, but because they were in God's will. Okay? Sorry?
Was that to test them?
Exactly right. Exactly right. And so there they were because they were in God's presence and in God's will, and they went through that storm because it was God's purpose for them to go through it so that they would grow in their faith. Now, Jesus, being God in the flesh, knows that there would be storms that blow up. It was Jesus' idea that they go through it. And so from this line of logic, we can say that they were not in the storm because of something bad they have done. So many people have come to me and said, I'm having this happen, and I think it's because of something bad that I did when I was a child. When in fact I look at it and say, no. You're going through this because of God's love for you. That you are becoming more of what he wants you to be because of going through the storm. Now, I've said this before, and I'll say it again. The greatest times of learning that I've ever had are when I'm going through the storm. When life is really, really good, it's nice. But I really grow when the storm kicks up, especially when I rely upon Jesus. Look at James chapter 1 and verse 2, if you would. The epistle of James chapter 1. That's near the back. James chapter 1 and verse 2 to 4. You'll find that on page 854. And every time I read this, it blows my mind. James chapter 1 and verse 2 says, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance. Perseverance must finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. Now, it blows my mind. Number one, consider it pure joy. Now, when I think of pure joy, I don't think of trouble. When I consider pure joy, I think of easy sailing. And yet, James says, who was the Lord's brother, he said, consider it pure joy when you go through many different kinds of trials. Because you going through these trials are going to have, or it's going to do something for you, which is really, really important. Maybe you've seen people where all around them life is chaos. Not of their own making, but it's just chaos. And you say to them even, man, I don't think I could do what you're doing. Because even though their life is chaos, they're fine. Do you know how they got to be fine? It didn't happen when they started going through that chaos. It happened years before with other chaos. And let me tell you, Jesus measures the trial that you're going to go through. He measures it. He measures it in such a way that if you go through it, you will be better for it because it matures us. So maybe you've seen people who have been going through a lot of stuff and yet they're not even hardly affected by it. It's because they have weathered the storms of life before and they are now mature because God has done something in them. Look at, we're going to conclude with this, Mark chapter 4, verse 39. Mark chapter 4 and verse 39 and 40. It says, he got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, quiet, be still. Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith? So here's the question that Jesus wants us to answer, because it's a piercing question that goes to the very depths of who we are. And I'll use the disciples as an example. As they had been going along with Jesus, they saw deaf ears unstopped so that they could hear again. They saw blind people and they could see again. They saw dead people raised to life. And here they are in the middle of a storm and all their faith disappears. I think it's like Jesus saying to us, don't you remember what I have done for you and with you and in you in the past? Don't you remember the walk that we have been on? And he's saying, if you remember the walk that you've been on with me, then let it build your faith and do not be afraid. Do you want to know something? On that Lockheed 1011, where people were screaming in the cabin, afraid that they were going to die and all that sort of stuff. Do you know what I think? I can't prove this because I never asked, but this is what I think. I think the pilot and co-pilot were going, woohoo! As they go down and up and around and all that. Do you know why? Number one, they trust their aircraft. Number two, they've been through storms before, okay? And to them, this is just another ride, all right? But for us that don't have the same experience, that's why it's scary. And so I think Jesus wants us, as he asked the question, why are you so afraid? I think what he's asking us to do as followers of Jesus is to trust him, even when we're going through the storm. Now, it doesn't mean just because you let out a scream as you think, as the plane sinks 4,000 feet, that you don't have faith. I mean, there is such a thing as a fight and flight syndrome, okay? And in a plane, you can't fight anybody, and you can't get off, okay? So you let it out like that, okay? So there's nothing wrong with that. But as we think of our lives with Jesus, why are you so afraid? If layoff is looming, if disease is attacking, then is the time to trust in Jesus. Because he will see you through it. I promise you, he will see you